ويسر لي امري واحلل بلساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very short introduction of today's program. Once again, we welcome all those attending this program and also those joining us via various platforms. As a background to this program, it's important to know it is not to oppose or convince anyone as a matter present here today. It been a subject matter of discussion and debate amongst great scholars for many centuries. We do not seek or expect to resolve those disputes through this program. The program is limited to the ulama. The general Muslim community are respectfully most incapable of simply understanding some of the technical complexities associated with the discussion of Aqeedah. This program is regarded as a pilot program, as it would be impossible to engage in a detailed discussion of Aqeedah in one setting like this. The program is intended to be a refresher course, in particular for those following the methodologies of the Imams, namely Abu Musa al-Maturidi and Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to renew our faith. That's why our local copy is on the post Jadidu Imanakum. Recent criticism of the Ash'ariyah created necessitated an awareness program regarding the correct understanding of the Ash'ariyah and their methodologies. This is an engagement in of the debate. We trust it will be beneficial, inshallah, and implore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to crown our efforts with His divine assistance and acceptance. After the program, inshallah, there will be some time given for questions and answers. You are most welcome to present questions to the speakers, inshallah. But remember and bear in mind, the Rasul said in Ahlus Ughlutat is where a person knows the answers, but he still poses a question to the speaker. Another explanation is where a person rather tests the speaker on his knowledge of Tariqah posing the question. We'd like us to follow all to refrain from such questions, inshallah, but let us ask questions for learning. It's not necessary that the person should know the answer. Part of ilm is to say, you don't if you don't know. Nasima al-Mahum used to tell us, if a person is posed to a question with a question, if a person 100% is the answer, it should be the answer. But is that 100% sure? You should rather say, if the rather to check up or find the proper answer. It will not make you a lesser alim if the person doesn't have the answer to the question, inshallah. So with this few words, we hope that Allah can answer beneficial understanding, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you say, Jazakumullah khairan to Allah. I wanted just to, shed some light as to what this gathering is about and why we are here. Just to lecture to what Maulana is saying, it's very important, inshallah. Maulana made mention of two things. That first of all, inshallah, after the program, which is part of the program, there will be a time allocated for questions and answers, inshallah. In fact, we come not for quarrels and arguments, so questions and answers, inshallah. So we take heed and we take lesson of what Maulana is saying, that is the proper adab, inshallah. And when we pose our questions, we ensure that it is for benefit's sake. Another thing to lecture, we know the famous verse of the Quran, I don't need to make tarjuma, the ulama is saying, so let us take heed of these things, inshallah. Just some adab also we need to attach to this majlis, inshallah. Number one is that when our speaker is speaking, inshallah al-Aziz, we are sitting in a hub here of ilm. We have giants sitting among us, and then we have some scholars also from among us, inshallah. So this is a hub here, and it's buzzing with knowledge, alhamdulillah. But let us try, inshallah, to maintain the adab and the etiquette of this majlis. I will mention a few, inshallah. So number one being, when we have our speaker here in the front speaking to us on set topics, number one, let us not engage in speaking amongst ourselves as well, inshallah. Let us try to take listen, make notes, and see how, mashallah, the ulama is sitting with desks. Let us take pen and pencils and make notes, inshallah, so we can take a learning curve from this experience. Number two, inshallah, I would assume that we know the adab is that there should no pictures be taken, inshallah. Please, I cannot emphasize this more. Please do not take any pictures, inshallah, Aziz. It is insulting and it's a violation of the speaker's right, inshallah. If so, after maybe the speaker allows us to do whatever, then bismillah. But from the front, inshallah, please no pictures. No videos as well, inshallah. Aziz, this is a request coming from the Idara, number one. Number two, as well as from the special guests, inshallah. No video should be taken. Audios is fine, I'm sure the Idara is sanctioned for us to make some audio recordings, inshallah, but no videos. Jazakumullah. And ensure that our cell phones are on silent or on vibrating, inshallah, because why would interrupt and interfere with for the frame of the program, inshallah. And if we have to take a phone call, inshallah, I'm sure that all the ulama are busy. It's a Sunday, so if you have to take a phone call, inshallah, please step outside and take the phone call to show respect to the people that are present, and more importantly, to our senior mashayikh that are present. And last but not least, inshallah, for those who don't know, the toilets in the building, inshallah, are for the students on khidmat to direct us to the toilets, inshallah. Well, no delay, we're going to welcome and call up our first honorable guest and respected Sheikh for the month, our ulama in the Cape, mashallah, very known to us, and not someone that is, you say this, not known to us, Maulana Ihsan Fortune. Just some background of Maulana, inshallah. Maulana is a Hafiz of Quran, barakallah. Maulana is also the Imam at Masjid Huda, is that correct, Maulana? Masjid al-Huda in New Woodlands. Maulana has been the Imam for longer than most of us can even count, alhamdulillah. Maulana has also been private. Maulana has been at Baytul Shukr, also closely in the Mintakhi area. And alhamdulillah, barakallah. Allah has blessed Maulana. Allah has keep blessing Maulana. Keeping Maulana with us for many moons. So Maulana is an ocean of knowledge, and we can only but take benefit of Maulana. Maulana, for jazakumullah.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور انفسنا ومن سيئات اعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد ان لا اله الا الله ونشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله يأمركم أن تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها وإذا حكمتم فاحكموا بالعدل وقال الله تبارك وتعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون وقال الله تبارك وتعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام والذي نفس محمد بيده لتفترقن أمتي على 73 فرقة لتفترقن أمتي على 73 فرقة واحدة في الجنة و72 في النار قيل يا رسول الله من هم؟ قال أهل السنة والجماعة قيل وما هم وما أهل السنة والجماعة قال ما أنا عليه اليوم وأصحابي رواه ابن ماجه في السنن وأحمد في المسند وكما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. My beloved ulama and colleagues and brothers in Islam, forgive me for certain errors that I'm making. This coming here is basically just to fulfill amana that I have taken and undertaken when I was requested to speak about the Aqeedah of the Al-Maturidiyah. I've undertaken this amana, and so incidentally, the reciter also recited his ayah of the Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded you that you must fulfill the amanats, you must implement the amanats, you must pay your trust and your promises, fulfill your promises to those people that you promised. So I've undertaken a promise, although it was not in a full senses. I didn't know what I was going to bring myself into, how I'm going to take this particular promise of mine. But alhamdulillah, I'm trying to carry it through with all my weakness. I'm not expert in Aqeedah. Like many of the ulama here, they're daily in touch with the kitabs. I see their library is packed with kitabs, mashallah. Unlike my library, few spend kitabs one day, all day teaching Afrikaans and some other subjects. Now all of a sudden I'm taken out from that environment to this environment where I must teach and speak about Aqeedah and belief and the creed, especially not just any Aqeedah, but the Aqeedah of a special group, and that is the Aqeedah of the Al-Maturidiyah, the creed of Al-Maturidiyah. Now, we know, beloved brothers and ulama, that our Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has prophesied in the hadith in the sense that he has taken an oath by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِي, by the one in whose soul my hand is, لَتَفْتَرِقَنَّ أُمَّتِي عَلَى 73 فِرْقَةً. That definitely and surely, my ummah will be divided upon 33 sects, 33 divisions, 33 teams, let's put it that way. وَاحِدَةٌ فِي الْجَنَّةِ, one of these sects will be in paradise in Jannah. وَإِثْنَانِ وَسَبْعُونَ فِي النَّارِ, and 72 sects will be in the fire of Jahannam. They said, Ya Rasulullah, the Messenger of Allah, they was asked, Manuhum, who are those people that will be in the fire of Jahannam? And who is that sect that will be in Jannah, that will be saved from the fire of Jahannam? Nabi alayhi salatu wa salam said, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that sect, which is termed as Al-Firqatul Najiyah, that sect that will be protected and saved from the fire of Jahannam, that sect is called the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ati. And then this Nabi alayhi salatu wa salam was asked, Manhum, who are those people? Man Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Nabi alayhi salatu wa salam said, Ma ana alayhi al-yawm wa ashabi. Those people who follow what I am upon today and my Sahaba, my companions. This hadith has been recorded, taken out from Ibn Majah, in the Sunnah, and Ahmad in the Sunnah. Now this is a very emphatic hadith that gives us a clear guidelines. Those people who are following my Sunnah and the Sunnah of my Sahaba, they will be from the Al-Firqatul Najiyah. In other words, the first 2 centuries of the Ummah. You get the Nabi alayhi salam, it was his century, Sahaba, Tabi'un, and Tabi'in. Those Tabi'un who follow the Nabi, the Tabi'un, the Sahaba, the followers of the Sahaba, it includes them. Ma ana alayhi al-yawm wa ashabi, and my Sahaba. So, the task that was given to me is to describe and to explain the life of the founder of the Maturidiyah school. Who is that founder and what is his life all about? Then I must explain the creed. What was his creed, his Aqeedah, and what was his style of information that he has, the theology that he based the school upon. And thirdly, the emergence. How did it emerge? How did the school emerge? In which areas did it develop, and so on. So he's speaking about the life of the founder of the school, Maturidi school. He says his name is Abu Mansur, Muhammad ibn Mahmud al-Maturidi, al-Ansari, and also al-Hanafi. He is called al-Hanafi. He He died in 1944. After Hijri is 333 after Hijrah. And he was born in the same, because the date of his birth wasn't known. But people could gauge from the death of his ustad. His ustad was Muqatil. Muqatil was his ustad, and he died in 248. So Abu Mansur was a youngster when he studied under his ustad. So which is the gauge at his birth was around about 200 and 258. Because ustad down in 248 after Hijrah. So he was born in Maturidi. Maturidi is also known as Maturidi, with the ta instead of a dal at the end. And that was the locality that was found in Samarkand. And the locality was known famously as Al-Maturidi. And because he died there in the same place, Samarkand, the area was also called Samarkandi because of the death of Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. Abu al-Maturidi, he came from a literary family. And he was a descendant of the known family of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, radiallahu ta'ala an. You all know the story of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, radiallahu ta'ala an. He died at a very, very old age, and he sacrificed his life for the garden of Islam, for the establishment of Islam. So that's, he was the offspring of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. And some scholars, they say, like I said, they infer from the death of his ustad that Muqatil al-Razi, that he might have been born in 258 after Hijrah. Imam al-Maturidi, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, he received very good education as a child. Very good education as a child. And he was, as we know, was influenced by the thought of Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi. And his asatida, some of his asatida that studied directly under Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi. He learned, for example, from Muhammad Muqatil ibn al-Razi, Abu Nasr Ahmad bin al-Abbas, Ali al-Abbas, Sheikh Abu Bakr ibn Ishaq, and Lusayl bin Yahya al-Balkhi, who died in 268. And all these people belong to the Hanafi school of thought. And we know Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, he promoted and defended the Hanafi school of thought to a large extent. And therefore he devoted his study, his life, he devoted his life to the study of the Quran and the Sunnah and Islamic fiqh and Tawheed. And Imam Maturidi, he went to further studies actually overseas, according to some narrations, where he studied fiqh and he studied the hadith. And then he was recognized for profound knowledge in the school, in the Sunnah school of thought, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. He had a great knowledge, and he was actually a promoter. And therefore Imam Maturidi, they say, he was one of the imams of the school of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, as far as Aqeedah and as far as creed is concerned. And therefore he got this title Imam al-Huda, Imam al-Mutakallimin, and because he safeguarded the Sunnah, the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the creed and the belief. And that's obviously a very great title that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him via the people of his time. So, what are some of the works that Imam Maturidi has produced? Imam Maturidi, he was a very brilliant scholar, and he had wide learning, produced abundant books in many fields. The works that he produced, first of all, Tilawat al-Quran, Kitab al-Tawheed, Kitab Ma'khad al-Shar'i al-Fiqh, Kitab al-Jadal, Kitab Usul al-Din, Kitab al-Muqalat, Kitab Bayan, Wahdi Ahl al-Mu'tazila. These are some of the books that this great scholar produced. And besides the two books that were published and are still prevalent today and are being used by the scholars, which are Kitab al-Tawheed and Kitab Tilawat al-Quran, they were published. So the other books really are not in circulation. These two are the only books that were published, Kitab al-Tawheed and Kitab Tilawat al-Quran. Who are some of the students of this great Sheikh? Some of the students are Abu Qasim Ishaq bin Muhammad, who died in 342. He was known as the wise man of Samarkand. And then Abu Hassan Ali bin Sa'id, And then Abu Muhammad Abdul Karim al-Hizbawi. These are some of his scholars and some of his students that he produced, alhamdulillah. But that is, we're not going to get as the speaker was saying, the introducer was saying, that we cannot cover everything and all the aspects of this in-depth school of Maturidi, theological school. We can't cover everything. So we just give a few hints and a few points, inshallah ta'ala. What was the creed? We're going to the creed of Imam Maturidi. What was his Aqeedah? We know, let's just by way of introduction of this point here, we know that the Al-Maturidis, what they base their Aqeedah, first of all, reason and aql. The reason and aql is applied to the Quran and the Sunnah. Whatever they do must be based, you must apply your reason and aql to Quran and Sunnah. You cannot just willy-nilly give ta'weel in interpretation on any verse of the Quran. So there's one verse of the Quran which spells out and donates the belief of one of the beliefs of the Al-Maturidis, and that is the verse of the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Laysa kamithli shay. Laysa kamithli shay. Laysa kamithli shay means nothing is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here's a word, Laysa, which is nothing, and the word is nakira shay'un. Laysa kamithli shay'un, which means nothing is like Allah. So this negates the genus of everything. If it is named, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that nothing is like Allah. That has been emphasized by the word nothing and the word nakira, the ism that is nakira. So which means it negates everything. Nothing can resemble or does resemble the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His asma, in His sifat, and in His ahad. In three aspects of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence, nothing can or doesn't resemble Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basic kamithli shay. And then to emphasize it further, that nothing resembles Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the comparison that Allah ta'ala used. Adad al-tashbih. The adad al-tashbih that Allah ta'ala uses, ka and mithl. Ka is a harf and mithl is the ism. Ka mithlihi. Both these two adad al-tashbih emphasize the fact that nothing ever, whether it's small, whether it's big, in any likeness, can be likened to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can resemble Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the foundation of the creed. Laysa kamithlihi shay. So argumentation method, this is what they have been using. The argumentation method which demonstrates the ideas in Islamic belief with reason and logic in the light of the Quran attaches more importance to reason. In other words, everything must make sense. Everything must make sense, but it's not based on that reason. You must apply your reason to the interpretation of Quran Hadith, but if it doesn't go, if it goes against your intellect, whatever you apply your reason to, then preference is given to Quran and Hadith, and not your logic, not your reason. Unlike the Mu'tazilas, which will go into this now, the Mu'tazilas, they base everything on reason, everything on logic. For example, they say there are three dimensions. There's Iman, and there's Kufr, and there's the middle dimension also. Iman and Kufr in the middle dimension. So what the Mu'tazila are saying is, if a person commits a major sin, he's out of the fold of his. He's got no Iman. If a person commits a kabira, he's got no Iman, but also he's not a kafir. He's got no Iman, but he's not a kafir. So they bring about a middle path. So he's neither a believer, neither a kafir. But this is where they apply the reason and the logic. Whereas we know that if a person rejects anything of deen, is out of the fold of Islam. If he commits a kabira, becomes a major sin, and that is Iman is reduced as we know. And Iman yazidu wa yanqus. Iman increases and it decreases. It increases with pious deeds and it decreases with committing sins, etc. and negligence. So, but this is to define and this is to oppose the Aqeedah and the belief of the Mu'tazilas. We know the Mu'tazilas were people who separated themselves from the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Therefore it's called Muqtar Wa'il bin, the founder, has then separated himself with, he was called I'tazala. He separated himself from the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So the Maturidin, they maintain it is with the reason that intellectual human being, by acquiring knowledge about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, that a human being, according to them, their creed is that a human being applies his mind when it comes to the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means that he must acquire knowledge in order to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created mankind and jinn except to worship me. Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala explains that إِلَّا لِيَعْرِفُونَ, they must recognize me. So, man with his intellect, he must actually acquire that knowledge whereby he can recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If a person doesn't apply his mind, he doesn't acquire the knowledge of Allah ta'ala, it does not mean that he's absolved from his responsibility to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the day of Qiyamah, we'll be told that I gave you reason, I gave you understanding. So, by not acquiring the knowledge through your reason and intellect, you do not have an excuse to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not punish me. You don't have an excuse. Why? Because through the reason and intellect, human beings are supposed to acknowledge and recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what they maintain, that the reason that the intellectual human, by acquiring knowledge about Allah, people who are ignorant of Allah ta'ala is still responsible because they need to ponder over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in so many places of the Quran, He says in the فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ etc. In the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the turning of the night and day and all that, لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. There are ayats, there are verses, there are signs for those people who apply their minds, for the intelligent ones. So Allah Ta'ala has given us so many signs. Like Imam Abu Hanifa will say, Imam Maturidi, he promoted the Aqeedah. Although he was a Hanafi in fiqh, he followed the jurisprudence of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, but he promoted the Aqeedah of Imam Abu Hanifa. And we know Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was approached one day. He was approached and he was asked to prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah explained to the person, the questioner, you see, in the ocean there is a boat laden with cargo, etc., etc. It goes from place to place. Do you think that boat goes on its own from the start till finish, and the cargo has been downloaded? You think that it does it on its own, or is there somebody that controls it, somebody that manages the sail and the movement of the boat? So obviously, Imam Abu Hanifa appealed to the reason of the person, the intelligence of the person. So he must think now that boat cannot move on its own. Like that boat cannot move on its own, offload and download and everything. So likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, likewise the universe is controlled by some creator, some being that controls it, make the sun rise, make the sun set, brought about the universe. You don't see any pillar that keeps up the universe. So there is a creator, a khaliq that controls it. And that's why Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah used the intellect. Therefore many of them, they have been accused of being ashab al-ghayb. The Hanafis have been accused of people of opinion. They apply the opinion, but within the parameters of Quran and Hadith, they will never go out of that. Because any opinion, any decision, any step that is taken without the parameters of Quran Hadith, outside the parameters of Quran Hadith, will not be accepted. Therefore, dispose of these madhahib al-arba in fiqh, these four madhahib in fiqh, these are the four madhahib that have been accepted. They all operate within the mainstream of the Quran Hadith. Then next, Maturidi, the school, they consider beauty and ugliness to be the essential, to be very essential, that human being, the intellect of human being must be such that he must be able to distinguish beauty from ugliness. That is essential. Whereas we find the Shaykh is going to speak about the Ash'aris. The Ash'aris say it's not essential for a person to be able to distinguish beauty from ugly. But this is one of the considerations of the Maturidis in the creed. They must distinguish, their intellect must be able to tell the beauty and ugliness of something. But it is not necessary. It's not necessary to believe what the intellect tells you. Here they actually similar with the Mu'tazilas in one aspect. although like we said, the Mu'tazilah, they have their own creed, and they creed differs greatly from that of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Now the Al-Maturidis, they support the study of religious questions. You must question religion, but it must be guided by the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, and Allah ta'ala orders human beings to study and reflect on everything in the universe and learn from the study and thinking in order to acquire knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us. How many places of Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا تَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنِ? If they have pondered over the Quran, if they studied the Quran, then they will reflect over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. So according to them, we need, in order to acquire knowledge, we need to reflect deeply on religious questions based on the Quran and the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let's say, for example, we're talking about some of the creed of the Maturidis. Allah Ta'ala creates everything in the universe, including what humans do. Allah Ta'ala grants them free will. So this is a very big discussion. In other words, if Allah Ta'ala, we believe in taqdeer, qadr al-khayr wa shar min Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala has put out that said that Qasim, Mathalan Qasim, he will go to Jannah, and Hashim will go to Jahannam. Allah Ta'ala has put out. Then what is the need for good deeds then? What's the need for good deeds? Now, we read in the Kitab of Mishkat al-Masabih, when Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam told Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, tell anybody that a person who says the kalima la ilaha illallah shahada shahada la ilaha illallah dakhala jannah will enter Jannah. You know that hadith. So he went to tell the people, and Umar radiallahu anhu stopped, and they gave him a shot actually. So he came to the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said, you mustn't say like that. You know, otherwise people will then place the trust only to recite the kalima, and then they will think they will go to Jannah, and they don't need to perform a'mal salihah. So by the Maturidis, they say Allah Ta'ala has created everything, including the free will of people. Allah has created the actions of people also. But there's a difference between the action of Allah and the action of insan. The action of Allah Ta'ala, which is called fi'al, the doing of Allah Ta'ala, and the action of Islam, which is called kasb. His action is called kasb. Allah Ta'ala gave him the free will, and he decided to do the good deed. He decided to do the bad deed, so that is kasb, that is earning. And ulama have taken out this concept of kasb from the whole Quran. We find Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَعَلَيْهَا مَا اكْتَسَبَتْ. For the nafs is what it has earned, and against the nafs is what it has earned. So the kasb that is what insan is doing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of all the af'al. خَلَقَكُمْ وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ, as Allah says. Allah created you in whatever you're doing. So now how can Allah, therefore this is the section of this, the place where the Mu'tazilah, where they are applying their mind and the logic to the extreme. So if Allah Ta'ala has put out, you must go to Jannah, why must you do amal? Allah Ta'ala put out that you must commit a sin. Why will Allah punish you for that sin? Allah shouldn't punish you for that sin. Because Allah Ta'ala put out. So this is what the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and in particular, the Maturidis, what they believe. Allah Ta'ala is the doer of everything. He is the Khaliq. He is the creator of the universe, creator of man, the actions of man. But Allah has given him human being. Allah gave him the free will, the ikhtiyar. Allah gave him the choice to do the good or to do the bad. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Allah Ta'ala has inspired this nafs with goodness, and inspired this nafs with piety, with goodness and evil. This nafs has been inspired with both. So, but Allah gave this insan the aql, the intelligence, and the will to decide. If he decides to do the good, then we say Allah will reward him for his decision, that he has done the good, that is his cusp. If he decides to do wrong, Allah will punish him because he has chosen to do wrong. So this is one of. In other spaces, humans have the ability to choose freely, thus being rewarded or punished after death for their choices. When human beings decide to obey Allah Ta'ala, He is the one that created that action of that human being. When he decides to disobey Allah Ta'ala, He is the one that negated that disobedience in that person also. So now we go to just those are some of the aspects. Of course, the sifat, the asma, the asma of Allah, the sifat al-zatiyya, sifat al-fa'aliyya, all this, the sifat al-fi'liyya of Allah, the actual, the actioning sifat attributes, we call it the action attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all in them has been encompassed in one word according to the Maturidiyya, and that's the word, that word is called taqween. All Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sifat that is to do with his actions, like rizq, giving rizq, and giving life, and giving death, and giving forgiveness, and giving rewarding, all these qualities of Allah ta'ala pertaining to his actions, his sifat al-fa'liyah, all combined and encompassed in one word called taqween. And the mukawwan, so Allah Ta'ala's taqween is not created, just like Allah Ta'ala is not created, his sifat are not created, his asma are not created, and the things that Allah Ta'ala created, that becomes makhluk. And all know the Quran is not also created, which is of course against the belief of the Mu'tazilah and the Jahmiyyah, and against their beliefs, who believe that the Quran was created, it's not, and the kalam of Allah is created, which means they separate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they separate Allah ta'ala from his sifat, separate Allah ta'ala from his asma. We say, the Maturidis, they say, the asma of Allah, the names of Allah ta'ala, the zatiyya sifat, zatiyya in its asma, it forms part of Allah ta'ala. If it forms part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is not created, then the names of Allah ta'ala are not created. Although Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given some of the names of Allah given to human beings, but there is a separation between, there's a difference between the names that Allah ta'ala has chosen for himself. Allah chose 99 names for himself. Inna lillahi tis'ata wa tis'ina isman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 99 names. Which Allah, man hafidaha dakhala jannah, wa ahsa dakhala jannah. A person memorizing the 90 names of Allah will go to Jannah. Now these names that we know, Allahu Al-Malik Al-Quddus Al-Salam Al-Mu'min Al-Muhaymin, these are names of Allah that Allah chose himself. And nobody, no human being has the liberty and freedom to choose a name for Allah, which Allah hasn't identified in the Holy Quran. For example, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is blessed. Tabarakalladhi biyadihi al-mulk. Allah ta'ala is blessed. But Allah Ta'ala cannot be described as Allah al-Mubarak, Allah al-Mubarak, Allah the Blessed Allah, because Allah didn't choose the name of al-Mubarak for himself. He didn't choose that. If Allah wanted the name Mubarak for himself, like we said, Eid Mubarak and things like that, Allah Ta'ala would have mentioned in the Quran. But Allah Ta'ala didn't choose that name. So Allah Ta'ala's names, some of the names of Allah are given to human beings, but there's a distinct difference. The difference is that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's names are part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's zat. So since it's part of Allah's zat, it has no beginning. It has no beginning. It's hadith. It's not hadith, azali. It's azali. Complete destination. Allah Ta'ala's zat, Allah's sifat, and Allah's asma are part of Allah's existence. It's not been created. Understand? Like unfortunately some other madahib, like the Mu'tazilas and the Jahmiyyas and the Qadariyas and the Jabariyas and the Murjiyas, they have different opinions with regards to certain aspects of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like Jahmiyas believe that Allah ta'ala has got a body. They believe that Allah ta'ala has got the jasad, has got a body. So when they speak about the eye of Allah, they actually refer to the literal eye. When they speak about the leg, they speak about the hand, they speak about the face of Allah, they take it to the literal sense, which is unbecoming. ثُمَّ اسْتَوَىٰ عَلَى الْأَرْشِ. That istiwa of Allah Ta'ala, they put in a literal sense, which the ulama of the Maturidi and the Ash'ari, we in the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we do not believe that. We say, we use the word kayf. Kayf means how. Allah settled on the arsh in the manner that He chose to settle, in His knowledge. The kayf we leave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot imagine how Allah Ta'ala settles upon the arsh. ثُمَّ اسْتَوَىٰ عَلَى الْعَرْشِ. You cannot imagine when Allah Ta'ala says, يَدُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْجَمَاعَةِ. Allah Ta'ala's hand is upon the jama'ah. We cannot understand. يَدُ اللَّهِ فَوْقَ أَيْدِيهِمْ. Allah's hand is above their hand. That is beyond our fathom. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone knows. Therefore the kayf we leave to Allah Ta'ala. We believe in the Quran as it stated, but the kayf we leave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the belief of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So we have here, those are some of the aspects. Wajib al-wujud, Allah ta'ala exists. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. A lot of evidences to show the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Maturidi school comes with about 4 different kinds of evidences. We can discuss maybe one form of evidence, the evidence of cause, the evidence of beginning. Let's speak about the evidence, the Dalail, Aqeedah, Al-Hidayah. Those evidence of beginning, where we can prove that if something has a beginning, that thing cannot be a khaliq. It cannot be a creator, it's makhluk, it's creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He brought everything into existence. The world did not exist, Allah brought it into existence. And there are so many other celestial bodies and creations out there that the scientists are only discovering now. They discovered 2 galaxies out there in the world with 100 times bigger than this earth. And like that, the knowledge will increase as science further their studies and investigations in the celestial. The knowledge increases. So many things Allah Ta'ala has uncovered. So who created all those things? Those things must have a khaliq. It must have a creator. And everything besides the creator is creation. Kullu ma khalaqa khala Allah batil. Whatever is besides Allah Ta'ala is batil. Means it has been created. And Allah Ta'ala is the creator of everything. Now we go to the emergence. How did the school emerge and where did it emerge? Emerge means the development of the school. Now we know that after the death of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, many arguments came about as far as theology, Islamic beliefs concerned. And the ilm al-kalam, which is the science of theology, also known as usul al-deen, also known as ilm al-tawheed and so on. The ilm al-kalam was then developed as fundamental principles of Islamic belief, known as ilm al-kalam, that developed. So this Islamic theology, study of Islamic belief and principles, and those people responsible for the study of ilm al-kalam are called mutakallimun, the theologists, people who go deep into the understanding of Islamic belief. So the Maturidi unswervingly protected the authority of the Quran and Sunnah, the scriptures, and the Sunnah of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, that theology. They protected it vehemently, and they safeguard the theology rationally without breaching the requirement and the spirit of the Quran Hadith. Without breaching the spirit. In other words, did some studies and they safeguarded the Quranic teachings and the Aqeedah of the Quran. And because of this, they were termed the moderatism. That was the laqab that somebody gave them, because they were moderate in their approach. They applied their reason, applied logic, but within the parameters, within the fence and the boundaries and the hudud of the Quran and Sunnah. So firstly, the emergence geographically. When we speak about it geographically, then we say that this Maturidi, they emerged in Samarkand. Samarkand was known as Eastern Rome, which was once termed the Silk Road. It was a center of business, the biggest commerce and trade center, and a very important place for the convergence of all cultures. Like those cultures, East and West, came together there in the Eastern Rome, and even the Chinese culture, Indian cultures, Arab cultures. So because of the various cultures, so this school that emerged, the Maturidi emerged, it became very tolerant and in many aspects, moderate in many aspects. So from a political point of view and academic point of view, find that they emerged in the reign of the Samanids, that political dispensation at that time, which was celebrated with academic excellence and scholarly atmosphere. Now, with Khurasan and beyond the river, what is Khurasan? Khurasan and beyond the river, and that was termed Central Asia. We find that this territory, Samani, they then bragged and they boasted with their political and intellectual achievements. And then we find with Baghdad, Bukhara as the capital, and the main city Samarkand, we find they became the centers of knowledge. And then the prominent geographer, Al-Maqdisi, he says, he called Khurasan, and beyond the river, he called it eastern region. That was the eastern region. Beyond the river, near Wara in Nahr and Khurasan, they say this area here is, if you call Transylvania today, it is eastern, what we call eastern region. Sharqul Muhit al-Islami. Is to call it Sharqul Muhit al-Islami. And then we describe the eastern region. He said that was the best place where the scholars and famous people used to gather. And people of Khurasan were the most proficient in fiqh. So this school, Maturidi school, emerged and developed in an area like that. The Maturidi school also developed in Khurasan and beyond the river, with all the multiple religions that were present, and religious sects that were present, and schools that were present. Remember, that was also the place where the Shafi school was, the Shafi mazhab was prominent, and also some of the Hanafi ideas were also prevalent that side. But the thinking, the Aqeedah, or the belief system of the Zoroastrians, and the Buddhists and the Christianity, they were also present in that particular area, geographical area. And then people started converting to Islam in large numbers, and they believed in different sects and schools since Islam was brought in. So they come with their influences. Those who were Christians, they came into Islam, so they had some Christian background. Those who were Zoroastrians, they came with that background. Those who were Jews came with that background. And even many Jews and Christians, like we said, embraced Islam. So Khurasan people then belong to numerous sects. Khurasan belong to numerous sects. The Khazraji, the Kharijites also spread in Sistan, in Hilat, and in Nisabur, they were the Mu'tazilas, were less in number than the Shias and the Karamats that were also existing there. In this region where the Shafi school, like I said, was dominant, was the Hanafi school that was also present there. So the establishment and development of the Maturidi school belonging to the Hanafi school, they actually promoted the Hanafi school and established, inheriting the promotion of the madhab of Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh. And the Maturidi school thought was known mainly in Central Asia during his lifetime. During the lifetime of Imam Maturidi, his madhab, his Aqeedah was practiced there, was lived during his lifetime in Central Asia. But after his death, this thought and his madhab was brought to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkestan, and all those other areas. And the students spread all over the world. The majority of the Chinese, he said, the Chinese Muslims also, they follow the Aqeedah of the Maturidis. So these are some of the things that I could manage to research on, and the emergence of the Maturidi school, and also the life of Imam Abu Mansur Muhammad bin Muhammad bin Mahmud al-Maturidi, and also the Aqeedah. We couldn't go in a little bit more depth. Wanted to actually more studies, time was too limited. But we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the short effort and sacrifice. And Allah must accept all our sitting, inshallah. And I hope I could benefit the Jama'ah with some information. Allah ta'ala accept.
We say Jazakumullah khairan, ahsan jazatu Maulana Hassan. And we pray to and we dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we benefited from the information and the research, profound research done by Maulana Hassan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless Maulana. Allah fill his life with full khairat and barakat, inshallah, as well as hasanat, inshallah. Just to lecture, I want to take this opportunity to applaud our Honorable Ustad, Maulana Munir. He's normally the MC for these occasions, and luckily for him, he's one of the keynote speakers, alhamdulillah. I want to applaud by saying that this is a very daunting task. Well done, Maulana, for you to master that. That's why you call the master of ceremonies. It takes a great amount of skill to take this microphone and be here to introduce the guests and make the guests feel welcome, etc. Maulana, may Allah bless you also eternally. Amin. Secondly, You know, I'm glad Maulana is one of the speakers, Maulana Ihsan, Hafidahullah. We were studying at the time, and Maulana Ismail Ali Rahimahullah was teaching us Aqeedah. And we were sitting over there, and at the very day, Maulana visited the madrasa, and we was with the Aqeedah class, and Maulana said he wanted to ask us a question. And Maulana responded to this, what Maulana was saying. I hope Maulana doesn't mind me eventually this, inshallah. I don't want to take flack afterwards, inshallah. So Maulana asked us this particular issue of Wahdatul Hujud. He asked, can anyone tell me what this means? So Maulana gave us a nice word. I don't know what Maulana said, they call it omnipresence. Is it correct, Maulana? They call it omnipresence. So Maulana asked, what do you understand from this word? So we were all dumbfounded because why it's the first time we are introduced to the science of Ilmul Kalam, and Maulana says, oh, Aqeedah. Long story short, so Maulana Ismail said, Rahimahullah. Anyway, Maulana stood and he said, can you tell me what does this mean? And we still didn't know. So Maulana wanted to become technical, and Maulana said, can Allah be in a desk or in a hole and these types of things? And we were like, no, but this can't be. So Maulana gave us the answer, and Maulana says, Allahu yaliku bisha'nihi. Allahu yaliku bisha'nihi. So the Maulana made this clear now again to us, alhamdulillah. It befits Allah to be, Allah is there, alhamdulillah. Maulana mentioned a nice few things. Maulana mentioned of kasb and akal. You know, nice thing there. So what we've learned now is on the footnote that akal is our liability and our kasb is our comfortability. Now, can appreciate it, inshallah al-aziz. Our akal is our accountability based on Maturidi, and our kasb is our accountability from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I just have to remind the ulama, inshallah, please just to maintain and observe the adab of the majlis, inshallah. Like I said, we have senior mashayikh with us, so let us show respect, inshallah, to them especially, and to especially to the guests, and to the masjid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just to reiterate, inshallah, please no speaking while the guest is speaking, inshallah, most of all. Secondly, please turn our cell phones into silent or to vibrate, inshallah. Take phone calls outside, inshallah, Aziz, and let us pay attention and listen attentively, inshallah. Again, we make dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bless Maulana, give you long life. Ameen. Our next speaker is none other than one of our ustads at the madrasa, Maulana Munir, very known to us, alhamdulillah, one of our teachers here. Maulana Munir. Maulana Munir, inshallah, you all know him as lawyers. I hope he's not going to take us to the Sunnah house, inshallah, with his relative information he's going to share with us, inshallah. Maulana Jazakumullah. Just there was Maulana, he's more nervous than me, just so that you know, inshallah. I might be the guy holding the mic, but Maulana is more nervous than me, inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى وسبح ما في الأرض وما في السماء والسبح ما بينهما وما تحت الثرى هو الذي تعزز بالقدرة والبقاء قهر العباد بالموت والفناء ليبلوهم أيهم أحسن عملا والصلاة والسلام على المرسلين والأنبياء خصوصا على سيد الورى شمس الضحى نور الهدى بدر الدجى محمد المجتبى هو الذي جاء بكتاب كشمس في ضحاها وبسنة كالقمر إذا تلاها من تمسك بهما عاش في النور النهار إذا جلاها ومن أعرض عنهما ضل في ظلمات الليل إذا يغشاها صلوات الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعهم بالهدى أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد قال تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد الفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم والسابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين تبعوهم بإحسان رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه وقال تبارك وتعالى والذين جاءوا من بعدهم يقولون ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم صدق الله العظيم وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما ورد عنه كل أمتي يدخلون الجنة إلا من أبى قيل ومن يأبى يا رسول الله قال من أطاعني دخل الجنة ومن عصاني فقد أبى. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أيضا خير أمتي قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Our respected Mashayikh, Ulama Ikram, as Maulana has said, I am very more nervous than what he is, because this is a topic with regards to which I am the first to acknowledge that I am completely out of depth. I've been tasked to do a presentation in a subject which I am a far cry away from being any sort of expert. In fact, I am only a student in every aspect of being. I am only sitting today in obedience to the mashura of our Satira. So I request of you, first of all, to bear with me. And I am sitting in the form of a student reading his dars to his ustad, so that the ustad may be able to judge to what extent the student has acquired an understanding, and to what extent I need to still engage myself in acquiring an understanding. It is generally not easy to speak about our mashayikh and our imams in deen, subhanallah. Such personalities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used as a means to preserve this deen for us, so that today we can be Muslim. Subhanallah. I always find it very unnerving when we sometimes listen to talks of people criticizing these personalities. From an academic perspective, perhaps to criticize the academics, that is in its place, but to criticize the personalities is something different. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first of all give me and all of us an appreciation for these personalities. And may Allah ta'ala grant to continue to take benefit from the work that they have done. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the Sahaba Ikram, and by the ittifaq of the ulama, it is agreed that even though the Sahaba Ikram as a group have been protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in relation to the preservation of deen, but we do not claim any of the Sahaba Ikram to have been imbued with the quality of Isma. That they were also, open to faltering and to making mistakes. But in those instances where they have made mistakes, it is not for us to delve into their mistakes and shortcomings or to make it as a means for their abuse and criticism. And similarly, when it comes to the A'imma, we do not attribute the quality of Isma to them. They can falter, they can make mistakes. But the question we have to ask ourselves is that who we are today and where we are today, are we really fit? Are we really fit and in a position to be criticizing these personalities? So may Allah give us hope. With regards to some of the things that I've been able to research with regards to Imam Abu Hassan Ali al-Ash'ari, it's always difficult to be the person who speaks after somebody from the caliber of our respected Ustad Maulana Ihsan Fortune in the first instance. And secondly, there is a number of congruences, a number of similarities and agreements between some of the things that I will mention and some of the things that Maulana has mentioned. So I request of you to please bear with me that I am not repeating some of the things which Maulana has said because I wish to add anything to what Maulana has said. Rather, it's just that the nature of the topic is such that in certain instances, the different aspects of it does overlap. So may Allah Ta'ala grant us tawfiq and guidance. Imam Abu Hassan Ali al-Ash'ari is referred to his name as being Ali ibn Ismail ibn Abi Bishr Ishaq ibn Salim ibn Ismail ibn Abdullah ibn Musa ibn Bilal ibn Abu Burhad ibn Abi Musa Abdullah ibn al-Qais al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. He is considered to be a descendant of the Sahabi Abu Musa Abdullah ibn Qais al-Ash'ari, who was originally of Yemeni descent. And Imam Abu Hassan rahmatullah alayhi and radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and his great-grandfather Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, he is said to have been born in the year 260 after Hijrah at Basra. His father was also a scholar of Deen. In fact, it is considered by many of the historians who wrote on his biography that he actually comes from a scholastic family. He comes from a family of scholars. And his father, having also been considered to be a scholar of note, passed away while he was still very young. And his mother then subsequently remarried another scholar of prominence in Basra by the name of Abu Ali al-Jubba'i. And Abu Ali al-Jubba'i, he was at that time the foremost scholar in Basra of the Mu'tazili sect. So as such, we find that the formative years of Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari rahmatullah alayhi was spent under the tutelage of al-Jubba'i. And as such, his nurturing took place within the context of the principles and the beliefs of the Mu'tazili. And this is well recorded, this is not disputed. And therefore we find that during the first half of his scholarly career, Imam Hassan al-Ash'ari was a disciple of the Mu'tazili teacher, Abu Ali al-Jubba'i. And as such, as Maulana has also mentioned, that predominantly the methodology of the Mu'tazili was the emphasis of intelligence, reason, and logic. So Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, he was therefore trained in this methodology. He was trained in this methodology to such an extent that he became an expert at the views of the Mu'tazila as well as the methodology. And he was often engaged in debates either defending or asserting the views of the Mu'tazila due to his proficiency in knowledge and debate, to such an extent that in certain instances, al-Jubba'i, who was his teacher, would give preference to Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari in order to engage in the debates. Such proficiency and competence he acquired in this field. And then at the age of 40, it is said that Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, he abandoned al-Jubba'i as well as the Mu'tazili doctrine. After asking a question which al-Jubba'i was failed to resolve regarding the doctrine of divine obligation. One of the principles of the Mu'tazili sect is that they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is obligated to do for a believer that which is best for him. That which is best for him. It is a principle that is referred to, as as-salih wal-aslah. What is good and what is better. Now there's a number of discussions regarding how all of this happened. One is that at the same time, Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, he went through a sort of an internal conflict. And in regard to this internal conflict, he sought guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because he came to realize that the doctrine of the Mu'tazila and what is contained in the Quran, in the Hadith, as expounded by the scholars of the likes of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, rahmatullah alayhi, and others like him at that time, it was at variance. It was at variance. And he came to a certain personal conflict. And he had a certain quest, an internal quest, in trying to come to what was the correct thing to do. And as such, it is mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided him by way of a dream in which he saw Nabi Sallallahu on a number of occasions, and Nabi Sallallahu encouraged him to stick to the Sunnah of Nabi Sallallahu, to the way of Nabi Sallallahu. And in this regard, he then approached Al-Jubai and asked him a certain question, in terms of which he made an example of three brothers, one who died, one who died while he was still very young, and one brother who grew up to be very obedient, and one brother grew up to be disobedient. One brother grew up to be obedient and disobedient. One brother grew up and rather one obedient, one disobedient, and one passed away in infancy. So he asked now, what will be the condition of the one who passed away in infancy? So he said, that he will be in a manzila baina manzilatayn. So he asked him, the one who grew up good, he said, no, you'll go to Jannah. And the one who grew up disobedient, he said, no, you'll go to Jannah. So we said, but now, what about the one that passed away in the infancy? Now, why must he be in the manzila baina manzilatayn? So he said, no, Allah Ta'ala will tell him that I knew that you would grow up to be disobedient, so in doing what is better for you, I caused you to pass away in infancy. But what if the brother, then he said, what if the brother then responded by saying, but what if it allowed me to grow up and I could become good like my good brother, then I could also have gone to Jannah. So because on an intellectual basis, this could not be adequately and decisively resolved for Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, he decided to abandon al-Jubai, and then also he started treading the path of engaging and acquiring knowledge from the scholars who were following, as we would refer to, the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So at that time he started also to leave the Basra, and he came to Baghdad. And when he came to Baghdad, he took fiqh from the Shafi jurist Abu Ishaq al-Marwazi. And then the principles of Aqeedah from a personality by the name of Abdullah ibn Sa'id al-Kullabi. And then he devoted the next 24 years of his life to the refutation of the Mu'tazila, the Rafida, the Jahmiya, the Khawarij, and all other, groups that were at variance to the Aqeedah of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And it is said that he passed away in Baghdad in the year 324. Now Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari abandoned the dogmatic approach of the Mu'tazila for those Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and other components and aspects of the Aqeedah of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And he followed the teachings of prominent scholars who had their principles based on the prominent scholars within the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the difference was that Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari at that time adopted a different approach to what was adopted by the mainstream scholars within the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And that he adopted the approach of defending the same principles of the usuls of deen and aqeedah, whilst using a type of rationalist argument, which was similar to the approach that was adopted by the Mu'tazila. And therefore we find that in relation to this approach, and the approach that was followed by the other scholars at that time, it was not to differ from the usuls of deen. It was not to differ from the usuls of deen. It was only a difference in methodology. For example, if we take the number 10, this is now a sort of a rational approach the rational understanding. And if I tell you, how do you get to 10? How does one get to 10? What would you say, how does one get to 10? Would you agree that 9 plus 1 is 10? So is that the only way to get to 10? Or would you agree that 8 plus 2 is also 10? And would you agree that 7 plus 3 is also 10? Equally 6 plus 4 is also 10. And 5 plus 5 is also 10. Now what was the difference in 9 plus 1 and 3 plus 7? It was both the means to arrive at 10. So in the same way, there was no difference in the principle of 10. It was only a different methodology to arrive at 10. In the same way, Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, in regards to the principles of the usul, the fundamentals, was not at variance with the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. It was only a different approach that was adopted to arrive at the same result. So therefore it is clear that the principles were thus the same, the usul. And we must understand in regards even to matters of Aqeedah, there are three things. One is the matter of usul, the primary matters on which there can be no difference. Then there is the matters of furu'. There are certain furu'at. The matters of usul are those matters upon which it is determined that a person is a Muslim. Then the matters of furu' stem from the usul, but they are not those matters upon which it is required for a person to either agree or disagree in order for him to remain within the ambit of Islam and Iman. There are secondary matters. And then there's a third component, which is the matter of methodology. The methodology of how to interpret the usul and the furu'. Now generally you will find that because the matter of the usul are not, as one, for lack of a better word, would say, up for discussion. The matters of furu', those are up for discussion. Now where the differences come in the furu'at is very often based on the difference of approach. The approaches that there is within Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah all lead back to the same usul, which are the foundational matters of belief. When it comes to the furu'at, those methodologies may come to different understandings, come to different conclusions, but those are those matters within which certain variances are accepted and allowed because of the differences of methodology. So inshallah we will try to elaborate a little bit more on that as we carry on. But obviously, as was mentioned, that for the program that we have, it is not possible to go into too great detail. And as our principal has also said, that these are matters which have been the subject matter of academic disagreement and dispute for centuries. And the program here is not to try and convince anyone of any particular approach. It is simply to make it clear and for us to understand that the approaches followed by Imam Maturidi and Imam al-Ash'ari are within the ambit and the limit of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. In fact, to be honest with you, to say the Aqeedah of al-Ash'ari and the Aqeedah of Maturidi is an absolute misnomer. It is the Aqeedah of the Salaf and Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. It is the methodology of Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and the methodology of Imam Maturidi, but it is not an Aqeedah which they developed. They simply sought to explain and make clear to us the Aqeedah of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, following a different approach. And you will find that just as the madahib in fiqh developed, these madahib in the Aqeedah developed accordingly in order to meet the demands of their time. As Maulana has also explained, that with the area where the Maturidi Aqeedah was developed, there were certain realities that existed. The Aqeedah was not, or the principles were not developed in a vacuum. It was developed within a particular
structure, within a particular setting, within a particular contextual reality that demanded that approach in order to preserve the Aqeedah of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. In the same way with Imam al-Ash'ari, he lived within a certain contextual reality. And with regards to that, it was necessary to adopt a particular approach. We will come to that still as well, inshallah, in order to do what? Not in order to develop an Ash'ari Aqeedah. There's no such thing as an Ash'ari Aqeedah. It's Islam. It's Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You understand? It is just a methodology that was approached in order to preserve the Aqeedah of the Salaf and the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So may Allah Ta'ala help us to understand that particular aspect. So with regards to this difference of approach, it is just that these principles were thus the same as that of the Salaf, but his approach varied. And Imam al-Ash'ari was not the first person to have applied kalam, which is referred to as ideological rhetoric or ideological theory. Theory regarding the principles or discussions regarding the principles of belief. Or rational argument to the defense of the orthodox doctrine. The orthodox doctrine meaning the Nas of Quran and Hadith. Amongst those who had made similar attempts earlier was scholars by the name of Al-Harith bin Asad al-Muhasibi, who was also a contemporary of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullah alayhi, and Abdullah bin Sa'id al-Kulabi, who was the Ustad who became the Ustad of Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari. Now Imam al-Ash'ari rahmatullah alayhi, however, seemed to have been the first to do this in a way that was acceptable to a larger body of orthodox opinion. In other words, that was acceptable to the Muslim scholarship of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah who existed at that time and subsequently. And why was this? This is so because he had the advantage of having had an intimate and detailed knowledge of the views of the Mu'tazila as well as their methodology. You know, sometimes we say that you don't fight fire with fire. But technically, this is the approach that Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari used with the Mu'tazila. This is the approach that he used. He used their own methodology in order to engage with him. But what was the difference? If you fight fire with fire, how do you achieve a result? How do you achieve a result? You make a bigger fire. And this is what Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari was able to achieve because he had the support of Quran and Sunnah as well as the support of the methodology adopted through the Orthodox school. So he was able to refute their arguments, not because he was intellectually more superior, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it possible for him to gain certain insights through his attachment with scholars that were also experts within the Orthodox school. So he could fuse between these two, utilize the methodology of the Mu'tazila and be successful in refuting their arguments. Now some of the chief points on which Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari opposed the doctrines of the Mu'tazila were the following: that he held that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had eternal attributes. As Maulana has also explained that the Asma and the Sifat are eternal attributes attached to the Dhat of Allah ta'ala and they are not separate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has such attributes as knowledge, sight, speech, and that it was by these that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala therefore was knowing, seeing and speaking. Whereas the Mu'tazila said that Allah ta'ala had no attributes distinct from his Dhat. And then the Mu'tazila also said that the Quranic expressions such as hand and face must be interpreted absolutely figuratively. Absolutely figuratively. And therefore they said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could not have a hand, Allah could not have a face. So they said that these had to have other meanings. And these meanings which they then attributed was that grace for face, you know, and hand meaning certain other things. Imam al-Ash'ari, whilst agreeing that nothing corporeal was meant, as Maulana Ihsan also explained, it was not meant something corporeal, something tangible, something concrete. Held that they were real attributes whose precise nature was unknown. It was real attributes, like how we would say that Allah Ta'ala has got a face kama yaliku bi jalali wa kamalihi. Allah Ta'ala has got a hand kama yaliku bi jalali wa kamalihi. And that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's istiwa on the throne had to be interpreted in a particular way. That Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is on the throne kama yaliku bi jalali wa kamalihi. هو في السماء كما يليق بجلاله وكماله وهو في الدنيا كما يليق بجلاله وكماله. Wherever it is indicated that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala والله في السماء وفي الأرض, Allah is Allah in the sama and in the earth, we can never differentiate or remove from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala the attribute of Him being distinct and not equal to His creation in any way. So whether Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is said to be in the sama, it is kama yaliku bi jalali wa kamalihi. Above His arsh, kama yaliku bi jalali wa kamalihi. In the earth, kama yaliku bi jalali wa kamalihi. Yaji'u kama yaliku bi jamalihi. He comes, nuzul kama yaliku bi jalali wa kamalihi. All of these we give the attribute generally. I will come to another aspect of this also. But it must be considered that this aspect of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's existence is never separated from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And then also that the Mu'tazila had the view that the Quran was created, was Imam Ash'ari maintained the view that it is the speech and eternal attribute of Allah. That is why, I will come to that still. And in position to he also opposed the view of the Mu'tazila that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala could not literally be seen, since that would imply that He is corporeal and limited. Imam Ash'ari hold the view that seeing of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala in the Akhirah is a reality. That Allah Ta'ala will be seen in the Akhirah, and that it is a reality, as the hadith of Nabi Sallallahu also mentions, that you will be able to see Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and nothing will be able to prevent you from seeing Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. However, he added, we cannot understand the kayfiyat of that scene. We cannot understand how that will be taking place, but we believe that it is a reality that will happen in the Akhirah. And then also, as Maulana has gone into the discussion of the choice and the free will of the person, and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala giving this insan this ability to choose. And the Mu'tazila, as Maulana gives that the Maturidi also have certain differences there. That everything good and evil is willed by Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and Allah Ta'ala creates the acts of men by creating within men the power to do the act, as Maulana is clearly distinguished by the doctrine of Qasb, also part of the doctrine of Imam al-Ash'ari. That Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is the final haqiqi, but that this human being, he acquires, as Maulana also mentioned, that his qasb is the result of what he has done. Otherwise, it would not be possible for a person to be held accountable. In fact, there's a narration that mentions that Abdullah ibn Umar was once sitting in the masjid, and he heard some people talking, and they were speaking about certain bad deeds what they were doing. And they were saying that, they cannot be held accountable for these bad deeds because Allah is decreed. So they would not be accountable, So he went to them and he explained to them, and he said to them that I have heard my father Ibn Khattab say that he has heard Rasulullah saying that the relationship between this human being and the decree of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is like this relationship between the heavens and the sky. Just like how you cannot escape from between the heavens and the earth. Wherever a person goes in this earth, he is always between the heavens and the earth. And he cannot escape from between that as long as he is in this world. In the same way, a person cannot escape from the decree and the qadar of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. But the question is that, can a person claim that the heavens and the earth has made him do the wrong? Can he claim that the heavens and the earth has made him do a particular act? He cannot claim that. In the same way, a person between the qada and the qadar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But your choice is to do the good or your choice is to do the bad. And therefore, Allah Ta'ala enables you to do. And what you are doing is also being created by Allah Ta'ala. But because you chose to do it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the cusp of either reward or the cusp of responsibility through punishment for what you have done. And at the same time, Imam al-Ash'ari, who also, contrary to the Mu'tazila, believe in what is referred to, as matters of the unseen of the Akhirah. Starting from the questioning of the grave. And the Mu'tazila does not believe that there's going to be questioning in the grave, but the questioning of the grave, the fountain, the Hawd of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the bridge of Sirat, and the scales in the weighing of the deeds, including the intercession of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, these were all rationally denied by the Mu'tazila, but they were confirmed by Imam al-Ash'ari on the basis of the containing thereof within the Quran and Hadith. And then with regards to the development of the methodology of Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, it is claimed that Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari went through 3 phases in his life. It is claimed that he went through 3 phases in his life, and that this was very relevant with regards to his methodology and what is considered today to be the creed or the Aqeedah of those who are attributed to the Ash'ari Aqeedah. And that they claim that in the first phase, he was a follower of the Mu'tazila creed, which is, as I've mentioned, he grew up under the tutelage of Al-Jubai, who was a preeminent scholar within the within the Mu'tazili creed. And in the second phase, he was as a follower of Al-Kullabi, to whom I have also referred. And then as such, he followed the creed of Al-Kullabi. And that Al-Kullabi was, according to this claim, not from the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And then thirdly, it's claimed in the third and the final phase of his life, he returned to the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and that he died in the state on the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Now, it is said that this is used as a premise, as a foundation, as a basis, these 3 phases, to substantiate the further claim. So this is the first claim, which forms the foundation of a further claim. What is the further claim? Is that Imam al-Ash'ari, rahmatullah alayh, is a follower who is followed by those who regard themselves to be on the creed of the Ash'ari or the Ash'ariyah. Just here as a note, those who follow the creed of Imam al-Ash'ari or the methodology are sometimes referred to as the Ash'ari, or they are referred to as the Ash'ariyah. It is also said, however, that sometimes when the reference is to Ash'ariyah, it is actually an inclusion of the Ash'ari and Maturidi. So when people criticize the Ash'ari and regard him to be, as some claim, Firqatul Dala, as some claim, Ahlul Bid'ah, whatever these derogatory claims are, then it is considered that that is technically inclusive of the Ash'ari and Maturidi. Technically inclusive of the Ash'ari and the Maturidi. So they therefore claim that people are in reality not following Imam al-Ash'ari, but they are actually following Imam al-Kullabi. They are actually following Imam al-Kullabi because even though the creed is attributed to Imam al-Ash'ari, it was actually the creed that he learned during that time from Imam al-Kullabi. And this was during his sojourn with him in the city of Baghdad. And it is claimed that Abdullah ibn Sa'id al-Kullabi was inclined to the Mu'tazila Aqeedah. So as to say that those who are following the Aqeedah of Imam al-Ash'ari are indirect Mu'tazilis. They are indirect Mu'tazilis. Because they claim that al-Kullabi was inclined to the Mu'tazili sect, and that as such he was not part of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So if we are indirect Mu'tazilis, then it means that we are indirectly out of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah as well. This is the claim. And through this they seek to show that Imam al-Ash'ari, being on the creed of Ibn Sa'id al-Kullabi, was thus asserting Mu'tazila beliefs or tendencies in his writings which were inconsistent with the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And as such, the Ash'ari doctrine adopted by those who follow it, as per the writings of Imam al-Ash'ari during this phase of his academic sojourn, are in line with the Mu'tazili creed and divergent to the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. As I mentioned, that they are saying that we are indirect Mu'tazilis and therefore at variance with the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They also claim that Imam al-Ash'ari in the later part of his life completely adopted the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and thus the creed attributed to him, which is at variance with the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is incorrectly attributed to him. So they are saying that those writings which took place during that time when he was still a student of Al-Jubai and thereafter are inclined to Mu'tazila, or to the Mu'tazila beliefs. Subsequent to that, he had at the third phase where he completely came into the Aqeedah of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and that those writings which are followed that he wrote during that time by the Ash'ari creed, that this is incorrectly attributed to his actual creed, because that was a creed inclined and promoting Mu'tazila creed, because he actually passed away on the creed of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So now in response to these allegations, the followers of the Ash'ari creed respond the following: that with regards to there being three phases in his academic sojourn, the first thing we start with is that it is considered that Imam al-Ash'ari passed away and left this world on the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. As such, Imam al-Ash'ari, he was on the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah. He was on the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The question is, are those who are today following his creed also on the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or are they indirect Mu'tazilis? Now we must understand that Imam al-Ash'ari, so the question is that our Imam that our Aqeedah is attributed to, it is said that he was from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, but in following him and his writings, we are not part of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah and variance with the Aqeedah. Wallah. So we must keep in mind that Imam al-Ash'ari rahmatullah alayhi was a well-known historic figure. And in spite of the claim made by some regarding there being three phases in his academic development, only two phases are historically proven. One is a claim, but what is historically proven is only two. And what are those two? It is historically established that he was initially on the Mu'tazila creed, and after, that was the first phase, and after denouncing the Mu'tazili creed and his reversion to the creed of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, he wrote all of his books in defense of the propagation of the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So he started on the Mu'tazili creed, and after, at the age of 41, when he reverted to the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, he remained on that creed. This is what is historically proven. Only two phases, and not an intermediary third phase, as is claimed from certain quarters. And this is by reference to scholars such as Imam Abu Bakr ibn Fawra, ibn Khalqan, ibn Dhahabi, and al-Dhahabi rather, in his Siyar al-Alama Nubla, and Alama ibn Khaldun. These are the scholars who confirm that Imam al-Ash'ari rahimahullah, in his initial stages, he was on the Mu'tazila sect, and thereafter only a second phase is confirmed by these scholars, and that is the phase of him coming onto the Aqeedah and the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and then passing away in that. And then the second thing to this is that intellectually, the claim of three phases is also unsound, on the basis that Imam al-Ash'ari denounced the Mu'tazila creed, and he was a master in it. He was an expert in it. And he subsequently denounced it on the basis of him coming to the realization that it was ideologically flawed. It was intellectual, but ideologically, in terms of the principles enumerated in the Quran and Hadith, for the greater part, it was inconsistent, and therefore it was flawed. Now, why should we therefore believe that Imam al-Ash'ari rahimahullah would then attach himself to al-Kullabi, who is considered to have also been inclined to the Mu'tazila principles, and then whilst with him not able to recognize that he is a Mu'tazila. Why would he not? He was able to disassociate himself from Dubai, who was the person responsible for nurturing him on the Mu'tazila creed. He was prepared to separate himself because of what he realized and recognized of the Mu'tazila creed, prepared to separate himself in the first instance from Jubai and Kullabi, if it is considered that, as they claim, he was also inclined to Mu'tazila beliefs. Imam al-Ash'ari now is considered not to be able to recognize it with al-Kullabi, and therefore remain with him. It is intellectually flawed. Because if he was an expert, he would have been able to discern that al-Kullabi was also on the Mu'tazila creed, and he would have been prepared to separate himself from al-Kullabi just as much as he was prepared to separate himself from al-Jubbari. And then a further substantiation towards the claim that Imam al-Ash'ari went through 3 phases, as claimed by some people, are that what is alleged to be certain differences which exist in 3 of his famous writings, namely al-Ibana, al-Risala ila Ahlul Tugha, and the third being al-Lum'a, which allegedly indicates to changes in his creed. They claim that if you read these books, then you will see that there are certain changes in his creed, and therefore this is an indication that he went through these phases, and that his creed subsequently, alhamdulillah, changed to become finalized on the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which he passed away. Now, in response to this, the scholars have stated that on a closer and a proper reading of these writings, it would become clear to any person of discernment that the differences within these writings are not contradictory. They are not contradictory, but rather these differences are complementary, as the one writing complements and completes the other. It complements and completes the other. Another difference is also to be found in the different modes of writing. You can't say that because there's a difference in the style of the writing, that this is indicative of a difference in the creed. This is also intellectually flawed. Because the differences in the mode of writing is based on the differences of the audience that were being addressed, by the Imam in these different writings. So these differences are in no way indicative of a difference in creed. Rather, they collectively expound the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Then with regard to the matter of Abdullah ibn Sa'id al-Kullabi not being on the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, it is claimed that there are the 3 phases, in Imam al-Ash'ari's academic journey. One being a Mu'tazili, then being in the phase in between being a Mu'tazili and Ahlus Sunnah, and then finally coming onto the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah. And this claim is considered to be completely baseless and unfounded, both historically and intellectually, as I mentioned with regards to him being able to discern what were the views and the principles. If he was a master, unless you can say that, al-Kullabi was an even greater master than him, and was such that he could even make it possible that Imam al-Ash'ari could not discern that he was a Mu'tazili. And it is historically, intellectually considered that this is absolutely baseless. So, therefore, it equally holds true that the engagement with Ibn Sa'id al-Kullabi was during the phase in which he became an adherent to the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And similarly, that Ibn Sa'id al-Kullabi had therefore to form part of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, who was a follower of the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And many prominent scholars have also attested to this, such as At-Taj al-Subki, Allama al-Kawthari, Qadi Subha, and Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and as well as Imam Ash-Shahrastani. All of these scholars have concluded and agreed that Al-Kullabi was indeed an adherent of the creed of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They all attested to the fact that Ibn Sa'id al-Kullabi was from the scholars of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, along with other prominent figures such as Ibn Abbas al-Qalansi and Al-Harith al-Muhasibi. Ibn Sa'id al-Kullabi was not only considered to be an adherent to the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, but rather an ardent and defender and a fervent propagator thereof. Hence, Imam al-Ash'ari inclined and had a reliance on him. So, in this regard, we will come to the aspect where it was a difference not on creed but methodology, which indicated or caused people to deduce that Ibn Kullab was inclined to the Mu'tazili doctrine. So therefore the point of contention between the approach of Ahmad bin Hanbal and that of Kullabi and others. He was a teacher of Kullabi by the name of Al-Karabisi. He was also contemporary of Ahmad bin Hanbal. And Kullabi and others who had the same views as them was regarding the difference of view on whether or not the words produced by reading the Quran are created or not. Whether it is created, the words produced while reading the Quran are created or not. Because all of them agreed that the Quran was the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's uncreated. So this was the usul. This is the primary principle, this is the usul. Is the Quran created or uncreated? As far as all of these scholars agree that it was uncreated. Mu'tazila said that it was created. Now the secondary question that follows on that is, the words that are produced when we read the Quran, are those words uncreated or is it created? The view of Ahmad bin Hanbal was that the one who says that the words produced in reading the Quran are created, that he is an innovator. And this is what a view considered to be held by the Imam as a preventative to people delving into such discussions, especially the laymen, as it would lead them to saying that the Quran itself is also created. So, Saddan al-Dara'i, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal said that it is an innovation even, with regard to the istiwa. Imam Malik rahimahullah said that وَسُؤَالُ عَنْ بِدَعَةٌ. These are the kind of questions which it is not ideal for a person to go into these kind of discussions, because it is very dangerous waters to be navigating. And then the view of some of the Salaf in this regard was that it is not proper to say that the words produced while reading the Quran are either created or not created. You understand? Some of the Salaf was of the view that it is a dangerous thing to say it is created, and also to say that it is not created, because then I can say that Allah is now speaking through me. Because both of these answers can lead a person to fall into error, and especially so the layman. To indicate that there are certain discussions on the matters of Aqeedah, my respected ulama, which are not appropriate to bring within the realm of the awam. The problem that we have today, unfortunately, is that everybody wants to speak in front of the awam. Because these are academic discussions of a very delicate nature. And it can even lead, those who may assume for themselves a particular scholastic ability, it can even lead them into problems. That is why ideally these kinds of discussions should be kept out of the realm of the awam. May Allah give us tawfiq. And the view of Al-Kullabi and Al-Muhasibi and others like them, from amongst the Salaf, including a view that is also attributed to Imam Al-Bukhari, alayhi rahmah, was that it is acceptable to say that the words produced while reading the Quran is created in the meaning of qasm. As Maulana has explained, between the fi'l of Allah Ta'ala and the qasm. It is created not in the sense of a fi'l, it's not in the sense that, this is now Allah speaking through me. Rather, it is in the sense of qasm, that I am choosing to read the Quran so that I may be rewarded. And in certain instances, not reading the Quran becomes blameworthy. So it is for the purpose of qasm of reward and to a degree, not doing it can also cause a person to become blameworthy. It is in the meaning of kasb, created in the meaning of the kasb of the slave, whilst having conviction that the Quran itself is the uncreated word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The difference of opinion between Imam Ahmad and his adherents and Al-Karabisi, Al-Kulabi and others from amongst the Salaf that had the other view was an acceptable difference amongst them that did not relate to a rejection or a dispute on the fundamental usuls of Aqeedah, but rather a difference in approach, a difference in maslak and methodology, and a difference in regard to secondary issues. Both views existed amongst the scholars of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and for Al-Kulabi and others like him to hold a view that is different from that of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal in this regard does not negate them being part of the scholars adopting the creed of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This difference, so you cannot say that whoever is at variance with Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal with regards to certain acceptable matters of creed are therefore out of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. It is improper to make such a claim. Because you must first accept that there were other ulama and scholars from amongst the Salaf, the Salaf Salih, from amongst the Salaf Salih, that generation which Maulana is indicated to be the Sahaba, the Tabi'in. From amongst them there were those that had different views and difference of opinions, different maslak, not with regard to the usuls, with regards to maslak and furu'at. And in this regard, you can't put them out of the fold of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah because they are at variance with Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq and guidance in this regard. So, and these differences are similar to the differences amongst the Imams of the Madhahib, who differ on matters of methodology and secondary issues, but who do not differ on matter of primary principles. Imam al-Ash'ari rahimahullah set out to prove the ideological creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah using the methodology of ideological doctrine through reason. So those scholars who adopted the strict adherence to what is stated in the Quran and the Hadith regarding Allah Ta'ala and His attributes did so without attempting to give it a meaning beyond its literal meaning. And they did not attribute any kayfiyah to it. This is referred to as the approach of naql. Now, even with regards to this approach, there were two approaches. One was acceptable, and one actually became unacceptable. As Maulana has also explained, one became known as the principle of taqweed, and meaning that scholars like Muhammad and others said that Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, He's got a face, Allah Ta'ala has got a hand, etc. And we believe in this, we accept it. But there is no attribution of a kayfiyah to it. And because of this, we make taqweed of the meaning to Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala alone knows what is the true meaning of this. Then there are others that on the basis of the naql took such a literal belief to it that they will say, no, Allah's got a hand. In other words, one is where on the basis of those who make taqweed of this in aql, they regarded face, watch, and hand, etc., similar foot, sitting, the istiwa, etc., to be a sifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whilst those who took the extreme literal view, they attributed it to be an actual limb. To be an actual limb. Like a hand like our hands, a face like our face, a foot like our foot, a sitting like our sitting. And this is became the view, and this is referred to as tajassum, So this is also not acceptable, but it is based on the literal approach, showing that even within the acceptance of the literal approach, this needs to be qualified. It cannot be absolute. And then the rationalist approach that was adopted, it is said that they adopted a more philosophical approach by applying reason to understanding its possible meanings. And this also has got two parts to it. One was accepting what is stated in Quran and Hadith and then applying reason to prove it. This is the approach that was followed by Imam al-Ash'ari. Then you find like the Mu'tazili and others like them who applied such a rational approach that they negated the quality. They said, no, it's impossible for Allah to have a face or a hand, and that these words had to have a different meaning. So we can see that in the one, there was two, a sort of balance and an extreme, and in the other one there was also two, a sort of balance and an extreme. The balanced approach with regards to those who applied the aql was with Imam al-Ash'ari. The extreme was with the adherents of the Mu'tazila. The balanced approach with regard to those who based on the naql was with Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal and those who had the same approach as him. And the extreme view was with those who followed the tajassum, etc. So you can see that how between Imam al-Ash'ari and between Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, there was a requirement and a need to remain on the path of balance. And that in both instances, the literalist view of what is stated in the naql also had to be qualified, and in the same way what was applied to reason and logic also had to be qualified. I hope what I'm
We understand.
sometimes these things become a bit many speakers like over this. One was to first of all understand what is being said, and the second was to try and understand how to put it over so that others could understand. May Allah give us tawfiq.
Ameen. Barakallah feek.
So then you had the Mu'tazila that said that aql is above naql, and then the others who said that naql is above aql. Imam al-Ash'ari, because how did Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal qualify? On what basis did he qualify the extreme literalist approach of the naql? It had to be qualified, and in doing so, please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Intellectually, in applying his mind to him, it couldn't have been absolutely literal. So it had to be qualified. The only difference is that we do not attribute a manner to it. In the same way with Imam al-Ash'ari, with regard to the aql, it also had to be limited. And at the same time, it had to be limited within certain parameters. So, as we say that we are ummatul wasata. And for me, these two approaches brings us into the two lanes of the same road, which is the ummatul wasata. It is two lanes within the same road. It is not two different roads. It is two lanes within the same road. Just as we have the madhahib, which are four lanes within the same road. So that's four different roads. And then Imam al-Ash'ari sought to bridge between these two approaches by first confirming the acceptance of the naql, and then seeking to prove the correctness of it also by logical proofs, the employment of the aql. Indicating also that the aql is guided by the naql, and also that the aql needs to also be able to understand, the naql, as Maulana has gone into that explanation of the reason. Now, why was there a need for this approach? If you rotate it, let me immediately that it exposes of the I hope that the continuation, inshallah. Now, why is there a need for this approach? This approach was needed in order to deal with the philosophical doubters amongst the Muslims, as well as the existing rational groups such as the Mu'tazilas, who gained great prominence during this period to such an extent. Understand this very importantly, my dear brothers. The Mu'tazila gained such prominence during this period that they could influence political authority against the followers of the creed of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They gained such political authority. Now, can you imagine? We're speaking about the Muslim Ummah. The Muslim Ummah whose leadership became Mu'tazilas. And in fact, we speak about political leadership, because the true leadership of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is with the ulama, not with the political leaders. The true leadership of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is with our ulama, with our scholars, not with the political leadership. But they gained such prominence that they could influence. That's why we find that people, even like Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal and others, they could be arrested for their principles and beliefs. Why? Because this was a mechanism. The Mu'tazila could benefit from the political power of the leadership in order to overwhelm and overrun the scholars, and at the same time, the leadership could use the Mu'tazila scholars for the obtainment of, the religious sanction for the things that they wanted to do. So between I want to use the word corrupt, but between the leadership of that time and the Mu'tazila, it was a very convenient arrangement. The one could use the leadership to subjugate the ideological beliefs and prominence of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And at the same time, the other could use the ulama from amongst that Mu'tazila group to find religious authority and credence for the things that they wanted to do. Now there is essentially three contributing. Okay, I've been given 2 minutes to summarize the remaining half of my talk. But as we said, that it's impossible to go into all of these things. But why was there a need for this approach? In the first instance, I believe that there were three contributing factors to this. One being that the region from which most of these innovative sects come from was all the same region. It was all the same region. It all formed part of the Persian Empire. The Rawafid from Kufa in Iraq, Khawarij from Hurra, which is also near Kufa, the Qadariya, Basra in Iraq, Murji'a, Kufa in Iraq, Jahmiya, Kufa, Iraq, Mu'tazila also between Basra and because the person who formulated it, Wasim ibn Ata, was a student of Imam Hassan al-Basri. So you see, it's all in the same region, and politically the Kufans were a problem. Politically they were a problem. And how did they seek to justify the problems they created politically? Through ideological inventions. So this region became a problem, and it was in this region that Imam al-Ash'ari was obviously. Now the Persian Empire lasted for about 400 years, and they developed during the period of Fatratul Wahy. This empire is during the period of Fatratul Wahy, and as such, the development of this empire and its culture, etc., was all based on philosophy. They sought to define themselves through philosophy, which is the premise on reason. And by comparison, they were much more cultured and structured and advanced. The moral, value, and ethical premise was founded on philosophy, which included a mixture of both Persian, Greek philosophy, subsequent to the conquest of the former Roman empires. And then it even indicative that the main philosopher of the Khosrow at the time when Islam came to take over and engage with the Persians was actually referred to as a prophet. Because they had such reliance on the philosophers and the creed and the guidance of these philosophers, they were actually referred to as prophets. So this also shows that there was some background, because if you find the region that they conquered in Sham, etc., subsequently, this is where the hub of the Anbiya came. So prophethood was known to this region, although it was not known to the region from Persia, as far as we know. So to equate with the prophethood of the conquered nations, the Sassanides refer to their philosophers also as prophets. And then the second thing that contributed to this development of the Mu'tazila, etc., in this region, etc., was the struggle of language. Because the persons upon the doctrine of Islam also adopted the Arabic language. Although these scholars subsequently became masters in the Arabic language, in their formative years, these sects of innovation, because you will see that these sects of innovation happened in the formative years in the Khairul Qurun. The Khairul Qurun is referred to as the Khairul Qurun, but all the sects of deviation developed in that period as well. From the period of the time of the assassination of Sayyidina Uthman, Sayyidina Ali, etc., all of these were developed within the period of the Sahaba, the Tabi'in and the Tabi'in. These sects all, it's a Khairul Qurun. And all of these fitnas came from that time only, not from now. We're still discussing it now, but they came from the Khair period of the Khairul Qurun. And that is why Nabi Sallallahu said it to my Quran, because in that Quran, there was hardly any of these fitnas. ثُمَّ لَمْ indicating that as you carry on, things will get worse. And that is because more of these fitnas started emerging. So the struggle of language, and every language is a form of expression. You find literal and you find figurative. So generally, even for us, my own self, if I read something in Arabic, in my mind it's in English. So when I read it in Arabic, it is in English. So I use the laws of English grammar and language when reading even the Arabic in my mind. So how to differentiate between literal expression and figurative expression? This was a conundrum for them. That is why, to some extent, one had to be guided, and unless you were a master in Arabic, you would not know when it was intended to be literal and when it was intended to be figurative. This was the conundrum of language at that time. Because remember, we are speaking about the formative years. And then the third contributing factor from my side, and I'm going to end on this, although wallahi, there's still a lot of things that can be mentioned. Perhaps we can see if there's some time left later, inshallah. Because Mullah Asraf said he might not be speaking too long. In fact, he asked me to prolong my talk. But we'll see, inshallah, with Mullah's time. I think we're going to have a short break now after this. The third, and this is also very important, my dear brothers, is that the political turmoil that existed during this period, it became a contributing factor to the challenges that was being faced by this ummah with regards to its creed and practice. This all contributed to it. That notwithstanding the fact that this period is referred to as the best period, is also marred by great political conflicts within the Muslim community, which emanated mostly from the region where this innovated sects came from. And what this also teaches us, my dear brothers, is the harm of disunity on the basis of intellectual differences which are considered irreconcilable on the basis simply of wanting to be exclusively right. It brings us to the harms, I'd like to reiterate that, to the harms of disunity on the basis of intellectual differences which are considered, they are not really irreconcilable, but they are considered to be irreconcilable on the basis simply of wanting to be exclusively right. Because it is such that when I'm right, the person who is different from me must be wrong. May Allah give us the faith, we will stop there. Unfortunately, many of the things that we wanted to share, we inshallah, perhaps we can prepare a PDF and we can make it available to the students. And Allah give us all the faith. And as I've mentioned in the ayah that I have quoted, when it comes to these, perhaps I must just read you what I wrote in the conclusion, if I may be indulged. My last 3 minutes, may I just read you the conclusion? Both Imam al-Ash'ari and Imam al-Maturidi rahimahullah were Sunni Muslims who lived during the time of the first 3 centuries. Now the first 3 centuries is not necessarily the first 3 generations. After the time of the prophetic revelation. And according to Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, it is understood that the earlier scholars held the most weight with terms to encapsulating, in regard to encapsulating the religion, the deen, and as was intended by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And both of these scholars defended and upheld and transmitted the beliefs of the Quran and Sunnah, not their own beliefs. The belief of the Quran and Sunnah as understood by the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in each generation before them. And they did so from the extremes of excessiveness, whether literalism or rationalism. They did so in order to protect the deen from the extremes of literalism as well as the extremes of rationalism. Their teachings and methodology were accepted as the standards of mainstream Sunni Islam of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah by clear general consensus of the scholarly community in their own time as well as in every generation since. The Malikis and Shafis on the whole became Ash'aris in theology, whilst the majority of the Hanafis became Maturidis, who are in many regards similar to the Ash'aris. Another conundrum faced by those claiming that the Ash'a or the Ash'a'ira, in this case the Maturidi and the Ash'ari, are deviant, is that by doing so they are effectively ousting a great portion of erudite scholars from the early era of Islam until modern day scholars. The very same luminaries who were the fortresses of the Quran and the Sunnah and the bastions from whom the Muslim Ummah had taken its academic heritage are now considered deviant and heretics. This is of course absolutely preposterous. It is inconceivable and intellectually reprehensible. The only viable conclusion is that the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, collectively referred to as the Ash'a'ira, are not a firqah. They are not a firqah or deviant sect straying from the path of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, but rather they are a ta'ifa, a group and a part from within the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Walillahi alhamd. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi subhanallah.
We say shukran jazeelan, jazakumullah khairan for that valuable information. Myself also has been taken aback by fear for responding, inshallah, and I can see and gauge by the attention, rather, although Maulana Muridi somehow demands attention, but the attention of the audience and the ulama sitting, mashallah, it was rather research, alhamdulillah, Maulana, may Allah bless you, bless your family and guide you, inshallah, to keep you always. You know, Maulana may mention, inshallah, there will be a break very soon. I just want to make a comment on a few things, inshallah. That the reason why Maulana is so warm-hearted about this Khairul Qurun, you know, Maulana takes this, Maulana Munir takes this bragging right to these from the Khairul Qurun of this madrasa. I hope Allah doesn't mind me saying this because why he graduated in the year 2006, which was the exactly third Jamaat Maulana, and therefore Maulana feels he's so of the Khairul Qurun of this madrasa, and therefore he takes it very to heart by making mention of these issues of Khairul Qurun. Barakallahu fi Maulana. I want to engage in a lot of things. Maulana made mention of tajassum, you know, and taking the literal and figurative approach, etc., and the sight or the seeing of Allah being muqayyad or mutlaq, etc. I want to make mention, inshallah, that across what Maulana read, there's a lot of critical analyzation and there's a lot of criticism. But let us just take heed of the words of Mashayikh rahimahullah, that in criticizing we should rather hate the crime and not the person. We should hate the crime, inshallah, and not the person. Maybe the person makes a mistake, etc. We hate what the person did, but we don't hate the person, inshallah. We like tawfiq. There will be a short recess, inshallah. I'm hoping till Maulana is 12 o'clock, okay? Maulana 12. Short recess, inshallah, till 12, inshallah. Then we will come together in the masjid, inshallah, and we will continue with the next this afternoon.
So Alhamdulillah, we are coming to a recess now. Mark that we are not displaying the faces, but it was the request of the speakers. I hope you understand, inshallah. I will keep the live on, but there will be a recess now, inshallah. So see you guys in 5 minutes. Is it a short one? Jaga spot, one spot. One spot. One spot. Open it. No. I'll just So Alhamdulillah, we're going to be facing with load shedding now, so I'm going to have to end the live, but I will restart it again when the break comes back. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.